So in our last video, we realized that choice involves this premeditation about what I'm going to do. And so Aristotle wants to take this and then work it out into a definition. And the whole key is, what do I do when I premeditate an action? Well, obviously, the whole purpose of premeditating an action or making a choice is to act. It's not simply thinking about what's true, what's eternal, what makes sense, but what must I do? What is the right thing to do? What's the smart thing to do? And so everything, therefore, involves a certain kind of thinking, the thinking that involves premeditation, which we call, both Aristotle and us in English, deliberation. And so therefore, from the very act of premeditating, we see, or premeditated choice, we have to have this idea of deliberation. Therefore, all choice is a certain kind of end result of a process of deliberation. So therefore, we need to understand what deliberation involves. And he's going to argue that once we understand the meaning of deliberation, then we will understand that what it means to make a choice is the deliberate appetition of things that lie in our own power. So let's work that out. Let's see how the fact that choice involves deliberation, and it must involve previous deliberation, really therefore leads to this appetition toward things which are in our own power. So what happens when we deliberate? Well, when we deliberate, as we said, we intend to act. We don't deliberate over things that we cannot act upon. And to see this, think about what happens when you deliberate. In the Greek, the word is bouliomai, okay? And bouliomai, its other meaning is to plan or to take counsel. So when you plan something, obviously you're planning to do something. It's not just, you don't plan a truth, you plan a course of action. And so therefore, the very fact that you deliberate involves this idea of acting. So Aristotle says if we look at the actual process, we'll see something about it. It's backwards. And in my logic class, I bring this out all the time. Good planning is what we call backwards reasoning. Well, where do we start? We start with the goal, don't we? Say our goal is to say we're given a mission and we choose to do that mission, and we have to plan it out. And say the mission is to take a certain bridge from the enemy and blow it up. Well, where do you start? You start with the final end result. What is the last thing I need to do to get that result? But after contemplating the result, let's say I figure out, well, it's impossible, because the thing I'm going to need in order to blow that bridge up is explosives. And I don't have any explosives, and nobody in our organization has the explosives, and we don't have the money to buy them, and we are cut off from all supplies. Then what do? We give up, don't we? We stop planning because the goal is impossible. And so Aristotle says, therefore, what do we deliberate about? We deliberate about things that are in our power. The minute we discover it's not in our power, we give up planning, and therefore we give up deliberation. But if deliberation is essential to choosing, then it follows that you don't choose things that are not in your power to choose. That is why we said a choice can't be equivalent to wishing. We can wish many things, but we can't deliberate and try to get things that we know are impossible. And so thus, the very act of deliberation is an act of planning, which involves backward reasoning, which involves going from the goal to the step toward that goal, the immediate step before that. And what do we do is we reason. So let's go back to that bridge. Let's say we have explosives. The question is, what do we do with those explosives? We bring them there, and once we get them there, we attach them to the bridge. We attach all the explosives to each other, and we then attach a switch or a remote so that with the switch we can blow up the bridge. But in order to do that, we need to get the explosives into enemy territory, which might mean that we have to camouflage ourselves, get enemy uniforms. How many men are we going to need? And then we need to get the men together. We need to train them to do the particular task, and each person involved with a particular specialty, which therefore involves that we need to call the men together, and we need to pick the ones that are best qualified. And we keep going back until we get to the first step, don't we? And when we get to the first step, what do? We act. Because once we have that first step, since the whole plan is to act, then nothing stops us from acting. Indeed, the very first step is the spur or the cause of our action. And so therefore, deliberation causes a drive toward acting, not a desire. Aristotle has distinguished it from desire, so he has to use another word. He uses the word alexis. And alexis literally means to stretch forth toward, or to drive towards something. So it is translated in your book as appetition, as a sort of appetite. But appetite we normally associate with hunger and a certain kind of desire. So the best translation is a certain drive toward a goal. So once we have that goal, we deliberate about it, we come to a plan that goes backwards to the first step. That first step is what we intend to do. We are therefore caused by our reason to do the thing which is in our power. Thus, deliberation spurs both an action and an action toward that which is in our power. The deliberate appetition or drive toward the things that lie in our power. Now, the important thing here to pick out of all this is what's the cause of the whole process. Since it's deliberate, since it's involving a thinking through or a premeditation, then the part of us that causes the whole process is reason. But reason must be self-conscious. And reason, because we are human, is the dominant central feature of ourselves. So what this means is, since reason is the cause of the drive toward acting, it follows that we ourselves are the cause, since we are centrally and basically our rational self-conscious self. And that is why choice is what gives us responsibility. So what have we seen? We've seen that the very process of making the choice implies that it is we who do it. And that involves selecting beforehand from various alternatives. But that selection process must involve a certain type of thinking, which involves deliberation, which involves planning, which involves a reasoning toward the things in our power, and therefore must be, because it's through reason, in our control and from our very decision. Therefore, to sum up the whole section on free will, we see why choice is the essential element in making an action valuable or worthwhile. It is because it comes from us that we can admire ourselves when we do it, and we do it well. It is because it comes from us that we can hate rationally or be angry at those who do a wicked action, because they are the source of it, and they did it of their own free will, knowingly doing it, not on the spur of the moment, but fully planned. And this, again, is worked out in our system of law. The most heinous offense is probably premeditated murder, first-degree murder, and therefore it merits the highest punishment. Whereas if we say that something was done at the spur of the moment, If it's an adult, because they have this ability to deliberate, we're still going to hold them responsible because they chose not to deliberate. They allowed themselves to become in a state that they didn't control, but they could have had control. But when you're in full control and you still do the wicked action, that is choice. And therefore, that tells us the most about who you are as a person. In our next segment, we are then going to show how these acts of the will produce the kinds of character that can dominate and control and sculpt our two most basic drives. First, fear, hence courage. Next, pleasure, hence self-control or temperance, the tempering of our drive toward pleasure.